Good morning, everyone. This is the second video reviewing the ethical standards for social work. It is important that social workers understand the professional activities that are expected of them. And one of the key concerns related to the standards are that um, um, they focus on what social workers' ethical responsibilities to clients are. So when you're thinking about ethical standards through the Code of Ethics, please be aware that it specifies and is concerned with making sure clients have an ethical responsibility to clients. Also, we know that ethical social workers also have ethical responsibility to fellow colleagues. In addition, social workers have ethical responsibilities to their practice settings. Social workers have ethical responsibilities as professionals, and social workers have ethical responsibilities to the profession. We also know that social workers have ethical responsibilities to the broader society. And below goes into detail with about what those ethical responsibilities are. So social workers' ethical responsibility to clients 1.01 is a commitment to clients. That means social workers' primary responsibility is promote the well-being of clients. Um, the interests of clients are considered primary for us, for social workers. However, social workers also have responsibility to the larger society or specific legal obligations may be on occasion supersede the loyalty owed to clients. This just means that we have to follow legal statutes and that govern local, state, and federal government. And when there are legal considerations, those type of considerations, can supersede loyalty to clients. And clients should be advised of that. So, for example, if a social worker is working in private practice, for example, uh, he or she may tell a client that they have a legal obligation to protect the client from themselves and other people. And so, if anything is ever disclosed in sessions that may indicate that client may hurt themselves or somebody else, um, the social worker may have a legal as well as an ethical responsibility to the broader society um, and other people to report that. So even though there's a commitment to promote the well-being of clients and to make sure that the client's interest is primary, understanding the well-being of that client is important, and you don't want them to hurt themselves, but also understanding the well-being of the larger society governed by laws may supersede the client's interests when seeking counseling from you or from any social worker. Um, Another standard that I want you to consider is 1.03 informed consent. Social workers should provide services to clients that is within the context of a professional relationship when appropriate, and with valid informed consent. Social workers should use clear and understandable language to inform clients of the purpose of the services that they will be receiving, any risk related to those services, and limits to services because of the requirement of a third-party payer. A third-party payer could be an insurance company, for example, and clients must be aware of in the informed consent of relevant costs that may be associated with services, reasonable alternatives for services, and also in the informed consent, it should be listed that clients also have the right to refuse or withdraw consent at any time. The informed consent needs to also include the time frame covered by that consent. Social workers should provide clients with opportunities to ask questions during the informed consent process. In instances where clients are not literate or have difficulty understanding the primary language used in any particular practice setting, social workers should take steps to ensure clients' comprehension. This may include providing clients with a detailed verbal explanation or arranging for a qualified interpreter or translator. In instances when clients lack the capacity to provide informed consent, social workers should protect clients' interests by seeking permission from an appropriate third party, somebody who has legal capacity to consent on behalf of that client, or informing clients consistent with the client's level of understanding. This may mean also making sure to use plain language and language that is at a lower grade level to ensure that clients understand. In such instances, social workers should seek to ensure that the third party acts in a manner consistent with clients' wishes and interests, and social workers should take reasonable steps to enhance a client's ability to give informed consent. There are also other sections here in which you need to be familiar with, and you can look at this on your own. The ethics are online, um, but I will touch on a little bit more. Social workers should discuss with clients policies concerning the use of technology in the provision of professional services. This is important, especially in practices that have a technologic that heavily uses technology, such as telehealth and or telemedicine. When we think of technology, we're also thinking about cell phone use, as well as computer technology as well, and how that may impact the services provided. For example, remotely accessing records. So again, social workers should discuss with clients the policies related to technology. Social workers' use of technology to provide social work services need to obtain informed consent as well from the individual using these services. During the initial screening or interview and prior to initiating services. A lot of times social workers are conducting intake or initial interviews with clients. And so that is when the informed consent process needs to occur and or prior to the start of services. So if think about consent as a contract for services. And so because that is the case, it's the contract between the social worker, the agency, and the client. So because it's a contract, that contract needs to be completed and informed consent provided before the initiation of services that are stated in that contract. Social workers should assess clients' capacity to provide informed consent when using technology to communicate, and make sure they're also verifying the identity and location of the clients as part of the informed consent process. Social workers who use technology to provide social work service should assess the client's suitability and capacity for electronic and remote services. This also means that social workers need to be mindful, oftentimes that there may be some barriers to use of those services if they don't have internet, if they don't have funds to maintain phone services for a mobile plan, for example. And capacity may also mean environment. Are they in an environment in which they can comfortably use the technology by making sure they're adhering to other rights, such as right to privacy and confidentiality, for example? Social workers should consider the client's intellectual, emotional, and physical ability to use technology to receive services and understand the potential benefits, risk, and limitation of services, and make sure the client is aware of that too. If clients do not wish to use services provided through technology, social workers should help them identify alternate methods of service. Social workers should obtain clients' informed consent before audio or video recordings, um, always. And social workers should also obtain clients' consent before conducting an electronic search on the client. Exceptions may arise when the search is for the purpose of protecting the client or other people from serious, foreseeable, and imminent harm, or for other compelling professional reasons. I took more time to go over this section because we are utilizing telehealth, electronic services, and remote services for work in social service fields. And so being aware of those ethical commitments is very, very, very important. Um, it is also emphasized in healthcare settings often, but we need to make sure that we're using the informed consent, that process of the healthcare system or the social service agency in which you may be working. Competence. Social work should provide services and represent themselves as competent and within the boundaries of their education. That means receiving the appropriate education, training, license, certification, and consultation and supervision or other relevant professional experience. It is why when you're doing your field placement or in field for internship, the supervision process is important. Also, the evaluation process when you're in the field is also important because it's a way that we're measuring your education and your competence. And again, we also have governance through the Association of Social Work Boards um, to make sure that social workers are trained and licensed and certified, trained and licensed and have certification in the necessary interventions. And this is to make sure that we're protecting um, the clients and making sure we're protecting the society by stating that the social worker is competent to deliver the service to clients. Um, Social workers should provide services in substantive areas or use intervention and techniques or approaches that are new to them only after engaging in appropriate study, training, consultation, and supervision. Again, the focus here is making sure that the clients, that social workers are using evidence-based practices in which they were trained to give. You can read the rest under that section. But our standards also have cultural awareness and social diversity. Social workers should understand culture and its function in human behavior and society, recognizing the strength that exists in all cultures. Social workers should have knowledge base of their culture, of their clients' cultures, and be able to demonstrate competence in the provision of services that are sensitive to clients' culture and to differences among people and cultural groups. This also includes populations such as LGBTQ. Social workers should obtain education about and seek to understand the nature of social diversity and oppression with respect to race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, political belief, religion, immigration status, and mental or physical ability. Again, this is taking a broad view of culture and understanding that when we talk about culture and social diversity, all these components are included. Um, Fortunately for us at Howard University, um, a lot of diversity, cultural awareness, and social diversity is embedded and themed throughout the classes and the program. And we use our guiding philosophy, the Black perspective, in order to do that. So please understand that when we're talking about the Black perspective and as we're teaching you the Black perspective, that there's direct connection between that guiding philosophy and your standard ethical standards in terms of obligation under cultural awareness and social diversity as a social work professional. Social workers who provide electronic social work service should be aware of cultural and socioeconomic differences among clients on how they may use electronic technology. There may be some cultural groups that heavily use technology, and there may be some cultural groups that do not. And so social workers need to be client about any implications to technology as it relates to culture. Standard 1.06 covers conflicts of interest. Social workers should be alerted to and avoid conflicts of interest that interfere with the exercise of professional discretion and impartial judgment. Social workers should inform clients when a real or potential conflict of interest arises and take reasonable steps to resolve the issue in a manner that makes the client's interest primary and protects client's interest to the greatest extent possible. Oftentimes there are conflicting interests when you are providing services as a social worker. There's the interest of your interest as the social worker, and the need to do your job. There's the interests of the agency in terms of the need of how the job needs to be done. And then there are the interests of the client's needs and or what brought the client to the agency. We need to be aware the standard is saying when there are conflicts in that interest, meaning the interest of the client may conflict the interest of the social worker, or the interest of the client may conflict with the interest of the agency. That is the case. We do have a conflict, and our code of ethics state that when there's a conflict of interest, the interests of the clients are primary and the protection of the clients is necessary. And so this can also be thought about as ethical dilemmas as well. And so one of the things this standard wants you to make sure is that when there's a conflict of interest or even an ethical dilemma, that the interest of the client should be primary interest, the most important interest that you need to consider as a social worker, and also making sure the clients are protected. Social workers should not take unfair advantage of any professional relationship or exploit others to further their personal, religious, political, or business interests. And that's part of the conflict of interest. So be sure that you are not taking unfair advantage of your clients, that being in your practice in the agency or your service to that particular client. We also have an ethical obligation to make sure your colleagues in that agency is not taking unfair advantage of a client. Social workers should not engage in dual relationship or multiple relationship with clients or former clients in which there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to that client. So if you have a contractual and professional relationship or a former contractual professional relationship with that client as a social worker, you need to be mindful of any other relationship with that client, particularly professional, because personal relationships with clients are considered unethical as well. But the different types of ways in which you may interact with that client in professional settings. And so you need to make sure that those dual relationships, as it may relate to different types of professional relationships in which you may encounter that client, that you are not exploiting or there's no potential harm for those clients. So you have to be mindful of those dual relationships and or multiple relationships and avoid them if possible. In an instance when dual or multiple relationships are unavoidable, social workers should take steps to protect clients and are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries. When social workers provide services to two or more people who have a relationship with each other, such as couples and family members, social workers should clarify with all parties which individual will be considered clients and the nature of social workers' professional obligation to the various individuals who are receiving the services. So being very clear who the focus of your service will be to, and also make those clients aware of your professional obligations to that client. Social workers should avoid using communication um, with clients. Um, so social workers should avoid communication with clients using technology for personal or non-work related purposes. So that's using social network sites and to contact clients um, for personal reasons is not ethically appropriate, or non-work related, um, um, and that's work as defined by your contract that you set, your service contract that you set with that client is not appropriate. Online chats, email as well, text, message, telephone, and video also is included on that. Social workers should be aware that posting personal information on professional websites or other media might cause boundary confusion, inappropriate dual relationships, or harm to clients. So this is just to be mindful that you represent the agency as a student in the field. You represent Howard University, for example, as a student. You also represent perhaps your own employment if you have a regular traditional job. And so sometimes when you post things on Instagram, you tweet, or on Facebook, you may consider that your personal space, right? But if clients have access to that, to your tweet or Instagram, or can see that, or your Facebook page, or come across it, it may be a conflict of um, how you're representing yourself. You may think you're representing yourself personally, but because people may know you at a professional capacity, it may appear that your comments or tweets may negatively or adversely impact the client and or the agency and even the university you may be affiliated with. Um, you can read the rest of the standards under conflict of interest, but I also want to identify privacy and confidentiality. Social workers should respect clients' right to privacy. Social workers should not solicit private information from or about clients except for compelling reasons. Once private information is shared, standard of confidentiality applies. Social workers may disclose confidential information when appropriate with valid consent, usually signed consent from a client or a person legally authorized to consent on behalf of a client. So confidential information can be disclosed, but in specific conditions when there is valid consent provided. Usually that's valid written consent from a client. Other examples where confidential information may be shared is if a social worker is subpoenaed by the court. Social workers should protect the confidentiality of all information obtained in the course of professional services, except for compelling professional reasons. For example, again, if you're subpoenaed by the court, or there's reasonable expectation that there's danger, the client may hurt themselves or somebody else. You can read more about privacy and confidentiality, but that is also an important obligation that we have uh, to clients. Access to records. Social workers should provide clients with reasonable access to their records concerning the client. Social workers who are concerned that clients' access to records could cause serious misunderstanding or harm to the client should provide assistance in interpreting the records and consultation with the client regarding the records. Sexual relationships. Social workers should under no circumstances engage in sexual activities, inappropriate sexual communication through the use of technology or in person, or sexual contact with current clients. Whether such contact is consensual or forced, it should not occur. Social workers should not engage in sexual activities or sexual contact with clients' relatives or other individuals with whom clients maintain a close personal relationship when there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to the client. Social workers should not engage in sexual activities or sexual contact with former clients because of the potential for harm to the client. You can read more about this standard here. Physical contact. Social workers should not engage in physical contact with clients when there is a possibility of psychological harm to the client as a result of that contact. Social workers who engage in appropriate physical contact with clients are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries. We also have standards related to sexual harassment, derogatory language, as well as payment of service. So when setting fees, social workers should ensure that fees are fair, reasonable, and commensurate with the service performed. Consideration should be given to clients' ability to pay as well. Think about social justice here. Social workers should avoid accepting goods or services from clients as payment for professional services. You can read more about payments and services on your own. Clients who lack decision-making capacity. When social workers act on behalf of clients who lack the capacity to make informed decisions, social workers should take reasonable steps to safeguard the interests and rights of those clients. Interruption of services. Social workers should make reasonable efforts to ensure continuity of services in the event that services are interrupted by factors such as unavailability, disruptions in electronic communication, relocation, illness, mental or physical ability, or death. This is important, disruption in electronic communication, because we are doing a lot of teleworking and remote working from home and remote working. So we need to make sure that we make reasonable efforts to ensure continuity of service when there are breaches or disruption in electronic communication. Referral of service is important. Social workers should refer clients to other professionals when the other professional has specialized knowledge or expertise, and that specialized knowledge and expertise is needed to serve the clients fully, or when social workers believe that they are not being effective or making reasonable progress with clients, a referral needs to be made. Social workers who refer clients to other professionals to take appropriate steps to facilitate and orderly transfer the responsibility. So when when you're in a service with the client, there is a contractual arrangement through the informed consent process. Um, when that contractual obligation ends is when you hand off or transfer that care to another professional, and facilitating the appropriate steps for that handoff is an ethical responsibility. Termination of services. Social workers should terminate services to clients and professional relationships with them when such services and relationships are no longer required or no longer serving the needs of the client. Termination should occur. So again, when services are no longer required or the needs and or interests of the clients have been served, it is time for termination. Social workers should take reasonable steps to avoid abandoning clients who are still in need of services through transferring or referring them to other providers. And social workers should withdraw services precipitously only under unusual circumstances, giving careful consideration to all factors in the situation and taking care to minimize possible and adverse effects. So it is okay to terminate us services right away when there are unusual circumstances. But even when you need to discontinue or terminate services right away, it is our ethical responsibility to minimize adverse effects on clients. You can read more about termination of services, but those are all of our ethical standards and obligations to clients. Um, Part of our standards also include social workers' ethical responsibility to colleagues, um, and you can read that on your own, but it goes into detail. The areas for that is confidentiality, interdisciplinary collaboration, disputes involving colleagues, consultation, sexual relationships as it relates to colleagues, sexual harassment, impairment of colleagues, incompetence of colleagues, unethical conduct of colleagues. Please take your time to read those standards to colleagues. Also, social worker ethical responsibilities in practice settings. This area includes supervision and consultation, education and training, performance evaluation, client records, billing, client transfer, administration, continuing education and staff development, and a commitment to employers, labor management disputes as well. So please take your time to read these ethical standards. This is important, particularly in your field placements, but you also will need to know these responsibilities to your agencies as you start working as professional social workers. Social workers' ethical responsibilities as professionals. Areas covered under this standard is competence, discrimination, private conduct, dishonesty, fraud, and deception, which we consider integrity as our value, impairment, misrepresentation, solicitations, acknowledging credit under this section. So please take your time to read your ethical responsibility as professionals. 5, social work ethical responsibilities to the social work profession. Integrity of the profession, evaluation and research is covered under this section. Please take your time to review this. Social workers' ethical responsibility to the broader society. Standards for this is social welfare. Okay, think of it. Think of this area as your broad ethical responsibilities. So to promote general welfare of society from local to global levels and the development of people, their communities, and their environments. Okay, so think about this individually, but broadly, macro perspective. Social workers should advocate for living conditions conducive to the fulfillment of basic human needs and should promote social, economic, political, and cultural values and institutions that are compatible with realization of social justice. I'm focusing a little bit more on this area for many of the social work students because they are not doing direct practice work. Um, even though clients, we consider clients and client systems. But I do want you to understand that from a macro practice, a meso macro, that we also have a duty, ethical responsibility for larger, broader group contexts as well. Public participation, social workers should facilitate informed participation by the public in shaping social policies and institutions. Public emergency, social workers should provide appropriate professional services in public emergencies to the greatest extent possible. Think of our professional, what are our professional services um, to public health emergencies such as COVID-19. We are supposed to utilize our skill set appropriately and in a professional manner during uh, public emergencies. Natural disaster, COVID, for example, are all good examples of that. Social and political action. Social workers should engage in social and political action that seeks to ensure that all people have equal access to the resources, employment, services, and opportunities they need to meet their basic human needs and to develop fully. Social workers should be aware of the impact of the political arena on practice and should advocate for change in policy and legislation to improve social conditions in order to meet basic human needs and promote social justice. This is an ethical responsibility of us. Um, be mindful, particularly when we are in election year or election years, that we have an ethical duty to make sure we get involved socially and politically to make sure that vulnerable, oppressed populations get the services that they need. Social workers should act to expand choice and opportunity for all people, with special regard for vulnerable, disadvantaged, oppressed, and exploited people and groups. Again, expand choice and opportunity is an ethical standard for social workers. Social workers should promote conditions that encourage respect for cultural and social diversity within the U.S. and globally. Again, social workers should promote conditions that encourage respect for cultural and social diversity within the United States and globally. So think about that when you think about the political climate. We have an ethical duties in within those type of climates, and we have ethical duties for social action. Social workers should promote policies and practice that demonstrate respect for difference, support the expansion of cultural knowledge and resource, advocate for programs and institutions that demonstrate cultural competence, and promote policies that safeguard the right of and confirm equity and social justice for all. So when you think about policies and practice, think about agencies, state, and federal policies, laws, legislation, statutes, and so forth. And again, think about the policies within your field internship, making sure that it respects cultural and social diversity. Social workers should act to prevent and eliminate domination of exploitation, of and discrimination against any person, group, or class on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, political belief, religion, immigration status, or mental or physical ability. So again, we have an ethical duty to prevent and eliminate discrimination and exploitation of many and all diverse groups. These are the main areas. I wanted to take the time to go over that because you are in the field and I want you to make sure that you're adhering. If you're a first level, a first year social work student, make it a point to familiarize yourself with these standards, um, master them, understand what's involved not only in our values as professionals, but the corresponding standard and expectation for practice. If you're a second year student, um, you are expected to know these and already be familiar with our code of ethics and our ethical standards for practice, but you are expected to be able to apply it and practice your standards on a more advanced level in your second year of a social work program. So consider when you're writing up or you're completing your process recording for field seminar to make sure you think about ethical standards and practice in your work with clients and incorporate that in your reflections. Think about your assignments for class. whether you're discussing or talking about your using discussion boards, you're writing your papers. Oftentimes, our papers are including the role, you to expand on the role of social work. It's important to understand your standards of practice and incorporate them when possible in your discussions. And so I wanted to make sure students are aware of these standards and that they're incorporating ethics and standards of practice in their discussions and their papers as well, and making sure that they use the standards throughout their work here at the university. Thank you.